Welcome to Leadership Development News, Profiles and Practices of Top Performers. I'm Dr. Relly Nadler. My esteemed co-host, Dr. Kathy Greenberg, is not here. She is vacationing in Italy, so we miss you, Kathy. But today, we're going to talk to Kendra Dahlstrom, and very provocative. As a leader, are you dead on arrival? So she's going to walk us through how high achievers lose themselves in success. So I'm really excited about that. We have some questions that we're going to ask her about that. She also has her own podcast, and I'll walk through that when we go through the intro. But for many of our listeners, we're zeroing in on 20 years at the start of 2026. Pretty crazy. We used to be called a radio show, and now, of course, we're podcast with everybody else that has a podcast. But we're always interested in interviewing key people who can bring you some tips, tools to be your best. Both Kathy and I are fans of emotional intelligence and certified in a lot of other different assessments, as is Kendra, as we'll talk about. And so this idea of being in the top 10% is a tipping point. If you can get you or you can get your team into the top 10%, there's all the metrics about being better performers, more productive, better with retention, better teamwork. And so what are some of the tips? What are some of the tools? What are some of the things that you can do? Maybe a little different. Sometimes we talk about, can you dial it up a little bit? Or often from some of the assessments, you may find you may be something to dial down. Maybe you're too assertive. Maybe you have too much empathy in the moment and then need to be more direct. And so a lot of the research is showing the top performers are in the have high emotional intelligence. And so that's what we're helping you here with. And the other piece of why this is so important now, you've heard us talk about everything is more. We have more emotions, more impatience, more anger, more divisiveness, more overwhelm, more stress. And so what's challenging is, how do you deal with the more? And this is where a lot of the tools and some of the things about managing yourself. So from the EI model, emotional intelligence, what do you know about yourself? How do you manage yourself? What do you know about others? How do you manage others? The 4-box, there's competencies in each one of these. And if you're interested in learning more about that, we have a lot of resources on my website, www.drrellynadler.com. There's some tools, there's some ebooks about coaching, and there's a lot of these podcasts that we have. So with that, let me introduce Kendra. And so Kendra is a highly sought after growth activator and executive advisor. She's worked with some of the big names in high tech, global brands, things, places, organizations that we all know. Amazon, VMware, Fortune 50 companies. And she's known as the face behind the leader. She's been a trusted partner with executives driving billion-dollar transformations, cultural shifts. And she has her own podcast, the High Achieving Leader Podcast. So we'll ask her about that. She's a creator of some of her own methods, the AIM True method. We'll unpack that. The uncooperating process. We'll unpack that. And she brings both boardroom credibility and deeply human wisdom. And her own near-death experience awakened her to the silent lies driving high achievers. So I'm interested in hearing, Kendra, about that and your own story. So welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
So Kendra, we always start off this way. So kind of walk us through some of the key influences, the people who have maybe helped shape where you are today, and then we'll unpack some of the gems and tools that you bring to leaders.
Sure. So really early on, I remember, I think it was about 13, I read my first Dr. Wayne Dyer book.
Oh, yeah.
And that kind of opened my eyes. I then moved on to, I think women are from Mars and men are from Venus. And I just was always seeking understanding because, for better or worse, I grew up in a pretty toxic family system. And so I really had this desire to understand human behavior at a very young age. I was parentified, as we call it in the therapy space, at a very young age because of a divorce. And so, when I thought about this as I, talk to audiences, I always tell them, I said, two different influences shaped me. Those who I didn't want to be like um, can shape me as much as those who
Yeah.
I want to be like, right? And
Yeah.
so I think it was in that the people that I had in my life, I was taught a lot through pain and absence.
Mm.
And then in that void, what I did is I just delved into human psychology, human behavior. I became really independent. And at the time, I was really leaning into emotional intelligence, but I didn't know what it was. And I don't even think it had, back in the 70s, I don't even know that it,
Right.
was a common thing that we talked about in leadership. But it really became my way of reading danger and then later reading people.
Mm.
And that hypervigilance is really what was the protection that was probably one of my best teachers and best
Wow.
influences, because it was disguised as, achieving, improving, and success later in life. But it really became a superpower. And now that's become how I teach others and work with others is how can we turn proving into presence through emotional intelligence?
Mm. I love that. So, and I guess we'll get more into that, and I'm going to just repeat that, write it down. How can we identify proving where we're all trying to prove ourselves, and that's some of the ego aspects and the things that we'll
Yes.
get into more presence. And
Yeah.
you said a couple really good things there. Just the idea of reading others. Within supposedly less than a second, we have this sense that we can see if we trust someone. Yes, we build it back up, on communication and other data, but we know right away. So it sounds like that sense of you just growing up, sometimes I call that psychology of mind, really being able to figure out what's going on and is it safe, is it not safe?
Yeah, and like I said, it's bred from hypervigilance because unfortunately, when you grow up in an abusive or toxic environments, you're
Mm.
always on eggshells about like when is fight or flight, right? Like when's my next attack happening, whether it's verbal, emotional,
Yeah.
physical, whatever. Um, and but it really can be a superpower if you can, we can talk through that later. But in terms of like how you acknowledge it and heal yourself, and then use it to really understand that presence enters a room before people do.
Mm.
That's why when like you walk in a room, you can just, you ever turn around and you're like, oh, somebody with like a presence just entered the room. I could feel it, but
Yeah.
they were behind me. I couldn't see it.
Yeah. And I'm sure you've experienced that many, many times as we all have, but supposedly kind of our vibe, the heart vibe and stuff
Yeah.
goes maybe around 5 or 6 feet, and I guess
Yeah.
depending on how intense it could be further, but you just can pick that up when
Yeah.
you walk in a room, or you can kind of see it with someone else, or better yet, feel it with somebody else.
Right. Right. And I mean, that's why sometimes you hear people say, oh, I don't know what it was. I just didn't get a good vibe about that
Yeah,
person.
yeah,
Right. And it can go
exactly.
both ways. Right. Or you say, wow, I don't know what it is, but I just get really good vibes from that person.
Yeah. I use that a lot, especially with my wife. I say, yeah, I don't know, this person's got good energy. You just kind of pick it up.
Yeah.
So, before we get into some of the specifics, kind of give us the high level, zoom out level, kind of what you do, in your professional life. So, like, what are the different aspects? And we'll start with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I I really call myself a, like I said, a growth activator because what happens and what I've noticed over my decades of doing this, and I have the trend analysis and use cases, when I look at them, I realize that when I am able to get in a space, whether it's Zoom or in a room with someone one-on-one, there's something in me that mirrors a reflection to them and suddenly makes it safe and okay for them to see the things that they may be avoiding,
Yeah.
or that the things that are working great in their life, but more often it's the things that they're avoiding and that aren't so great. And they kind of let their tail feathers down and they're able to be in a safer environment where they can say, okay, I can acknowledge that, maybe this career isn't going like
Yeah.
I wanted it 20 years ago, but it's not going the direction I want it now. Or maybe this, relationship with a family member isn't going the direction I want. And then they can be at choice, right? And we know that that's where the power lies, especially when you're looking at trauma-informed systems and working with people who have any sort of trauma in their history. So because
Mhm.
of my background, I bring a lot of that into my work because studies show that a lot of people that are very high functioning, high achievers, and executive level positions have some form of toxicity in their family system or some trauma in their history. And when I say trauma, it's relative.
Mhm.
But I mean, it could be everything from really severe to um, something that just really influenced them and shaped them and how they operate and how they self-regulate or not, right? And
Right,
so
right.
that's really what I do in my day-to-day work. Uh, the container is what we would call it. We could call it executive coaching. We could call it executive advisory. I do a
Okay.
lot of executive speaker coaching, which is quite fascinating to me because of my
Oh,
communications background, but it's because I understand human behavior and I understand how it's going to manifest and how they're showing up on big stages.
right.
And I have a theory and a saying where I would say that, that this being on stage is the spotlight for every insecurity you have. And so if you can't self-regulate and you don't have that EQ, it's going to
Yeah.
all show when you're on stage, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
True, true, true. Because you got that huge spotlight, and then you have the audience. Everybody's just looking at you. Um, and I'm sure you've been in those situations as I have in my speaking engagements or training. You can really see that they're with you. They're not necessarily judging, which you like you're saying the opposite side. If you got the spotlight and you're concerned, that often they're with you and they're sharing and that kind of in sync. The brains align if you're really connecting with them for sure.
Well, and that's the biggest part of it is I find that and it ties back to, this concept of proving, really, where it's like if you're up there and you're trying to prove and you're trying to be the smartest person in the room, I mean, of course
Right.
you're up there for a reason, you want to add value. But if you're going to come across as that, you're actually creating a large gap between you and the audience. But if you
Mm.
can bring them with you to the point that you
Yes.
made, you
Yes.
can close that gap, you can be vulnerable, you can share stories that add value and build connection, then that's
Yeah.
what's going to make people want to follow you, purchase what you're selling, whatever it may be,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Well, so it sounds like this near-death experience was a key realization, and you said a lot of leaders they don't burn out, but they just can't keep up, and they burn out because they've outgrown the life they built. So, on somehow your experience kind of shed light on that. Maybe you can share a little bit about that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I think for me, how it all manifested was that I got bacterial pneumonia and I went into septic shock and then I
Hmm.
started going into beginnings of some organ failure. Luckily, we got me to the hospital in time. It all happened very, very quick. And when you're fighting for your life like that, things become very real. And when your next achievement in life actually becomes, can I take
Right.
another breath?
Wow.
That's pretty shifting and pretty powerful, and it makes the next achievement of landing that deal or making this much money or buying that house or car feel very, not that it's not important, but trivial in that moment. And so in that moment, it's sort of this, I had this really big awakening and I had this whole near death experience where I met who I believe is God and had this conversation. And what was really pointed out to me was that I'd spent so much of my life worrying.
Hmm.
So many of my hours worrying. In fact, he even asked me, because we had this whole conversation where I remember revisiting what I would call quote unquote sins or wrongdoings, trespasses, whatever you call it, right? And I remember revisiting these things like, I stole a candy bar when I was 10 or, these things. And I was like, oh, please forgive me. I kind of had this life review of all these things that I felt bad about. And then I just heard the voice in my, whether it was my head or his. And he said, you think that's your worst sins? And I said, yeah. And he said, how many hours have you worried? Did you not gain an hour more of your life from worry? And I said, there's a Bible verse that says that. And I said, well, clearly not, because I'm here fighting for my life.
Right.
So it really just opened my eyes to how many hours I spent worrying, and where was that worry coming from? It was coming from trying to prove or control situations. And in that moment is when I decided that I wanted to release myself from the prison of proving and wanted to live my life,
Hmm.
um, not coming from a fear-based place, but from a place of
Yeah.
more compassion and understanding, and being able to um, just do things from a place of fulfillment for
Hmm.
myself and my
Yeah.
soul versus trying to
Yeah.
prove others. And
Right.
then, very quickly after getting out of the hospital, when I was home for several months healing, I realized that I deal with this every day with executives. They thought that the burnout was the lack of stamina. They thought something's wrong with them. They just keep pushing, pushing, pushing. But what they didn't realize is that we evolve and grow. And if we don't get a new fish tank, you know what I mean? We're still trying to build our life to live in the
Hmm.
fish tank that we created 20, 30 years ago when we started our career. So you have to upgrade the fish tank, right?
Right.
And so they've outgrown this life, but they think that proving is the way to finally work their way to success or be
Yeah.
happy, but they continually feel empty. And so that's when I
Wow.
had that epiphany that this was something that I'd gone through myself as a high achiever, but that a lot of the executives I work with have the same
Hmm.
experience, whether they know it or not. Sometimes they see the
Yeah.
symptoms, but they don't exactly know that that's what's happening.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's a powerful story, and it
Yeah.
sounds like it went on for months from what you're saying, and it kind of.
Yeah, I didn't realize post-sepsis syndrome is a thing. Like there's even like a whole like support group and website on it and
Mm,
organization and foundation,
yeah.
but it's a pretty real thing. And so when you're because the pneumonia had spread from one lobe, we have 5 lobes in our lungs, and it had spread from one to all 5 within like 24 hours.
Yeah. Geez.
So I was pretty close to being intubated and whatnot. So yeah,
Ooh.
it's a pretty powerful experience and takes you several months to recover.
Well, thanks for sharing that. We're going to kind of unpack that more. It sounds like that has been uh, transformational for you, and it's a transformational experience that then you're bringing it up for others. One of the things that I like to talk about is, which resume are you focusing on? So in your language, the proving resume, at your deathbed, is that proving resume the one that people speak about, or is it about the presence or just kind of who you are? And no one at your funeral is going to talk about, wow, you were right on top of these projects. You got so many projects done, and you returned emails by the end of the day, and you were never late for a meeting. I mean, those things are never there. And so we're pursuing that. But at the end, what do people remember? And it's probably that presence and how you made people feel, and how you connected with yourself, whether it's your higher spirit or not, which are
Right.
which is most important. Well, so we're going to take our first break. You're listening to Leadership Development News, and we're talking with Kendra here, and we're going to get more into dead on arrival, how high achievers lose themselves in success. So we're just starting this with Kendra Dahlstrom. Welcome back to Leadership Development News. We are talking with Kendra Dahlstrom. I'll spell that because her website is Kendra, Kendra, and then Dahlstrom, Dahlstrom. So you can go on there and you can kind of find out more about her and some of her tools and resources. So, Kendra, in the first part of the show, we were talking about your near-death experience and how powerful that is, really focusing on presence. And you've said that a couple of times. And, for me, that's so important. I've been a active, meditator since college. And just that idea of being, in the moment. And now all the neuroscience is also pointing to how do you stay in the moment when our mind, and you talked about worrying, and a lot of times I'll talk about the neuroscience with the default mode network, that it just wanders. It can wander into worry or it can wander into imagination. And I think for most of us, it wanders into worry. And it's really this kind of sense of presence. So let me ask you this question, and then we'll talk about some of your tools like the growth activator. So what do you do like in the moment to help you have that presence?
Well, deep breathing, and I do the box breathing, right? So in
Okay.
through the nose for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And I also do a lot of grounding. So make sure I in the moment, even if my feet are on the ground, I'll make sure that I can feel them on the ground.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Okay, make sure I'm
Yeah.
rooted, I'm grounded. Anything to kind of bring me back. Another trick is sometimes if you're sitting there, you can press on the palm of your hand.
Yeah.
So these are just little tricks to kind of get back in your
Yep.
body, when you
Yep.
feel like for me, when I'm not present, it's usually because I feel like I'm like all above my crown chakra and I'm just kind of like, I'm not grounded. I'm all over the place, or I'm getting too caught up in the
Yeah.
burning wood, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that those are tips that have worked really well for
Okay.
me, but the
Let-
breathing is by far the
So let me
best.
just reiterate, because these are the tips. We're going to get into other stuff, but these are the ones that in the moment, I talk about this moment mastery in the moment. So Kendra just said, and I'm also do the same thing. Be aware of your breathing. Can you wiggle your toes? Can you feel your feet on the ground? She mentioned kind of rubbing your palms. The one that I like is, can you tickle your palms? And sometimes
Mhm.
if you're in a Teams meeting or you're in Zoom, no one's got to see what you're doing. You're about ready to present something and you just want to calm. So if your focus is more on some of the here and now bodily sensations, it's going to minimize going to your head, like you're saying, Kendra, where all of a sudden you can be into that worry world.
You love that. Right. I'm not
So
done tickling, but I'm doing it now, and I like that. I usually do
I know.
a harder press, but I
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
yeah. So, and I think, yeah, there's a bunch of others, but I think just for our audience, those are 3 or 4 that you could be doing just to regulate yourself. And so you call yourself the growth activator. So really, what does that mean? And how does that differ from traditional executive coaching?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I think it's about, I think coaching is about guiding and supporting and helping people through a process. And then also a lot of the leadership development work, as you would know and you're familiar, is around tools. And coaches can provide that. But what I find that I really like to focus on is I spark an activation in people when they can finally recognize, yes, this is something I want to work on. And then in my work with them, it's less about teaching them tools, it's more about integration and embodiment. And so it
Okay.
really becomes about, how do I, once you're activated, that's great, but you need to integrate and embody it. Like we can all learn, I can learn that I need to wake up at 5 a.m. every day, but if I'm not integrating it and embodying it and
Yeah.
doing it in my life, it's not going to make a difference.
So give me an example of that, of
Yeah.
like say maybe there's an awareness, because a lot of in the coaching is, bringing awareness. When
Mm-hmm.
we think about the emotional intelligence model, self-awareness is where you start. But so then how does that awareness link into the body? Maybe there's an example of someone you work with or anything.
Yeah, so I can give you an example of actually, excuse me. I can give you an example of my Aim True method, which was designed around this. So Aim
Okay.
True is really just about helping people find their North Star and
Hmm.
recalibrating their compass, not based on the world around them, what's expected of them, what they're trying to prove for, but what is really authentic and true to them so that they're in full alignment. And so the A is obviously awareness and acknowledgement. The I is that once they have awareness and acknowledgement of, I have this job and it's really not serving me anymore. I'm a VP now and I wanted to be a VP, but now I just realized now that I'm in it, it's not really fulfilling me. It's not what I want. Great. Now you've hit an inflection point, which is the I in the Aim True method. Now you got to make a choice, right? You got to make a decision. Do you want to move forward and cross the threshold into this rite of passage that we kind of don't know what's on the other side, but do you trust yourself and source and everything else to get there? Or do you want to do the game board trick and go back to start? Right. And there's no judgment in what you choose to do. We do it all the time. I've gone back to start so many times. It took me my near-death experience to finally cross the threshold. So there's zero judgment from me on that, but that's the game we kind of all play, right? When we start to look at things that are challenging us in our lives. And so what I do is I like to say that as I take them across the threshold, and that is why I call myself a growth activator. I activate something in them by helping support them through this awareness. And then I take them across the threshold after I walk them through the process and they're willing to make the decision. And then we go into what we call is the T is for transformation. The R is the rite of passage. The U is what I call undoing or uncorporating. It's very similar to the term unschooling, if you've heard that term that they
Yeah.
talk about with a lot of kids that, go into homeschool systems. They kind of have to and program and undo some of these just patterns and behavior and things that they learned in the school systems. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's just a different way of being. It's a different way of living and learning and doing. And so what I take them through is what I call the uncorporating process that I've trademarked, that is all about these ways of operating and being and proving and living by the metrics, day and night, that we think are helping us, but they're actually limiting us. They're really, giving us schemas that are putting us in a box. And so we unwind all that and we look at, okay, how, does this certain behavior or thinking that I have to respond to an email within an hour every time I receive it really not serving me or the person on the other side of the email, and really questioning a lot of that. And so that's the end part of the rite of passage. And then once we get through that, then we lead through the E, which is the embodiment phase. It's like, okay, now you've identified all these things you want to change in your life. You're really seeing things from a different perspective. But we all know that on the change curve, change doesn't stick unless we do something to integrate and
Mhm.
embody. And that's the process that takes the longest, and it's at the tail end of the work.
Okay. So just for our audience, I got
Yep.
the Aim True and
Mhm.
I got awareness, inflection. What was the M?
It's awareness, inflection, make a decision,
Oh, make it so that was the T.
transformation, rite of passage. You could say undoing or uncorporating as my
Right.
trademark. And then the E is embodiment.
That's great.
Uh,
Um, so how do you know someone's got to embody it? Like, how would you know, that it's really integrated?
Yeah, that's a great question. I find that for me personally, and then I can share what I notice
Yeah.
in others. So for me personally, I started to notice that my reactions, so my self-regulation and my reactions to things changed. So
Oh,
instead of
okay.
us like, somebody says something, instead of being offended by it, I'm just
Right.
like, oh, that's interesting. Or I don't even think about it. It doesn't even bother me, right?
Yeah. Good
So it's
example.
reactions, it's
Yeah.
ideas, how you want to approach
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
But a lot of it's reactive because we live in a very reactive world. And that's what I notice most with clients is their
Okay.
reactions to things change.
Yes.
Their responses, let's call it responses. They move from reaction to response.
Yeah.
That's a better way to say
That's
it.
great. And that's good. That's kind of the same stuff that I would talk about. So one of the trademarks I have, if you stay on autopilot, you stay average. And I think we're
Right.
all on autopilot 95% of the time for all the right reasons. but it gets in the way. And I guess on the other side of what you're saying is people are less triggered or they're less on autopilot. They have more self-awareness to say, oh, in the past, I would have been triggered here. But now they kind of step back. And it's,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like, as we know, it's in that gap. And I think it's the work that you and I do. You got stimulus for most of us, stimulus, response, stimulus, and it's
Mm-hmm.
stimulus, same response. That's the autopilot.
Right.
And actually, what we want is stimulus, gap, best response.
That's
And
right.
so in our world, we're on autopilot, and it's only going to be more so with AI and the
Mm.
whole idea that, you know, we just don't take the time to think. So when someone's in front of you, Kendra, or in front of me, it's this idea Daniel Kahneman talked about in slow thinking. So
Oh,
you
yeah.
can ask the provocative questions. I can ask them, and then they can really kind of have that sense of embodiment, or even looking at, I don't know why I was thinking that, or, you know, now that I've been doing that, it's not working for me. They would
Mm-hmm.
never have that on their own.
Yeah. Yeah. Another great symptom that you just reminded me of is that they're integrating and embodying is they're slowing down to speed up.
Yeah,
So they really understand the 80-20 principle.
yeah,
They really understand that, like, oh, I can slow down and get more done. Less is more. I can actually, if I slow down and I'm not feeling like I'm packing my day with, 10 hours of meetings and going from one to the next because I
yeah,
have to say yes and do everything, but I'm actually picking the three things that are the most important strategic way to spend my day. And then the other things just kind of magically disappear or get done on their own and they're still effective. That's when I know, like, okay, they're
yeah,
getting it. They're
yeah.
using
Okay,
the
that's a good
tools.
example of the priorities.
Yeah.
Um, so you kind of talk about these six lies of high achievers, and I think we're
Yeah.
probably talking around it. But so kind of tell me, you know, about that. And you know, I think a lot of what your work is helping people. I would say in different language. You know, is this overused strength or success in excess? And so, how do they identify that, and then what do they do differently? My sense would be some of your six lies probably highlight that.
Yeah, yeah. So, the first one is that if you prove yourself, you'll finally feel free. Right? It's sort of this element of like, oh, I just have to prove myself and then I'll finally feel better because my boss will like me, or I'll
Yeah,
get the partner I want,
yeah,
or I'm going to get that promotion, or, whatever it is. But we kind of think that we can prove our way out of anything. And that became really clear to me, obviously, after my near-death experience. And the truth is that it really just keeps you trapped in the cycle of, you
yeah.
know, wanting that next thing to feel good instead of looking inside at the
Okay.
root cause and why aren't you feeling good and
Yeah.
healing that.
So that's the first lie.
That's the first one. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So go. Yeah. Walk us through a couple more.
Okay. Yeah. The second one is that achieving equals fulfillment,
Okay.
which
That's
isn't always true, right?
right.
The third one is that busyness is productivity. And so we've heard that from others before, but I like to just emphasize
Yeah.
that it does
And,
not equal productivity.
and
Um,
if our listeners
the
can be aware of themselves, I mean, that's that badge of honor. Oh, I'm so busy. You know,
Oh, I know.
kind of means I'm important. You know, because look at all that I got going.
I
So
hate when
that's
I hate when people brag about it. It's like, ugh, I don't like the word hate, but I really don't like that. The next one is that self-sacrifice equals leadership. And I think there's a really blurry line there that a lot of us think that servant leadership actually means self-sacrifice.
that's a good one. That's a really good one.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's how I was living a lot of my life, which is how I, came to it. External validation is success.
Hmm. Right.
Right. So we all know that
Versus
that's not
internal.
true,
Right.
but we live in a world where we get metrics from the outside that can define or
Yes.
guide our future. Let's not say define,
Yeah.
but what really most is like, what do you feel? What do you think? What are
Yeah.
your values? Right. And then the last one, the sixth one is, the one that really came to me when I was in the hospital is that you can outperform unworthiness
Mm.
because I didn't realize because of my, background that I had mentioned earlier that I
Right.
had done so much healing. I did so much therapy. I've been done so much Reiki and trauma work and all these things.
Okay.
I didn't realize that there were still remnants of unworthiness inside of me. And I
Right.
remember coming home from the hospital and I told my husband, I can't believe I almost had to die for me to realize that I'm finally worthy of being here.
Wow. Ooh,
And
that
so
kind
that's what brought forth this presence thing for me, really, was this
yeah.
idea that like just the fact that you're here, flesh and bone, breathing, is enough. Like
Yeah.
that's what makes you worthy. You don't even
Yeah.
have to do anything or
Yeah.
say anything, but just your
Right.
enigma of being here. That's what makes you worthy.
And so that's such good insight that you're bringing, and it goes, and we all know I've talked about are you a human doing, which is kind of summarizes a lot you're doing, but your lies and everything else goes deeper, or are you a human being, which is the presence and
Yes.
just kind of being here.
And that's why
Um,
I wanted to talk to you and to go back to just to circle
yeah,
back on it. That's what the DOA stands for, is doing. Like, are you living a life on, are you DOA on arrival? It's because you're constantly doing, and maybe
yeah,
there's really no strategy, right? It's not connected to anything. You're living one of these six lies.
yeah,
Have you outgrown the life that you're living and you're just not saying it or not willing to acknowledge it? You're avoiding that conversation. And are you constantly achieving, which I think is different than doing. I think doing is just constant busyness doing.
right,
Achieving is really trying to go out for that next goal, but it's trying to fulfill something. It's trying to
yeah,
fill your heart and your soul, and it
yeah.
doesn't. And so that's what DOA stands for.
Um, Dead on arrival, and then you're talking about the doing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
a
And
play
then,
on words.
and also, no, I like the images, that you have, because I think, as a speaker and a communicator, I'm on the faculty of a coaching school, and really saying, can you talk in pictures? Can you talk in stories? Can you talk in images? Because that's what people will remember. It's not all the key words. It's not all the data that you have.
Yeah.
So we're going to take our next break.
Okay.
I always know when this is this is an exciting podcast when it goes so fast. I'm like, oh, son, okay, wow,
I
we're
know. I was
there
like, I
already.
want to talk to you for 3 hours. Yeah.
Yeah, this is great. All right, so we're going to take our next break. This is leadership development news. We'll be waiting for you when you come back. Welcome back to Leadership Development News, Profiles and Practice of Top Performers. We're talking with Kendra Dahlstrom, Dahlstrom.com. And she's got a lot of things on the website with resources, and you can connect with her. And the idea of dead on arrival, how high achievers lose themselves to success. A lot of what we're talking about with this. And one of the things we were just talking about during the break, one of the things that you're going to talk about in your upcoming keynote focuses on emotional intelligence. We're both fans of that as an essential skill in an AI-powered world. So how is leadership changing? And so how do you see, along with artificial intelligence, um, the value of emotional intelligence?
Well, I think it's hugely valuable. I think it's gone up even more than I think it's always been important, really, but I
Yeah,
think now it's even more important because now we are not communicating in the same way we used to. So think about it like, we're on our phones, we're texting, we're on Zoom calls in corporate buildings where someone's just down the hall in their office on a Zoom
right.
call. We're not even
Right.
in a room together, right? So we're just becoming more and more distant in
Yeah.
terms of how we communicate, and so we don't obviously get the same fulfillment from that. And so I think now that we're going to be using AI for a lot of things, so not only is it going to be in the written form, so I'm a big believer in quantum and energy. So you can feel that. You can read when you read something that's been written by AI, I feel like I can always tell it's been written by AI.
Okay.
And so you're going to have that disconnect. In addition to now AI is going to be doing parts of jobs, right? It's going to be doing tasks. It's going to be doing program management. It's going to be doing all these things. So in this AI driven world, I believe each of us as individuals and especially leaders are going to need to lean
Right.
into the discomfort of EQI and
Yeah.
really master these skills if because that's what's going to differentiate them in the long run.
Yeah.
AI cannot do empathy, humanity yet, and hopefully never.
hmm I mean, the AI, it's pretty scary at what it can do. I mean, even in
Hmm.
the coaching school that I'm with, there are some different kind of AI bots that are pretty good. But I think what's missing, and this is what you hit on in the presence, and I've written about this also, is that connection, the oxytocin,
Hmm.
and the serotonin that may get released, kind of like what's underneath the vibe. Like, oh yeah, I feel good about this person. Well, we got all these invisible uh, neurotransmitters that are happening, and it's hard for
Hmm.
that with a bot, although they could give you the perfect response and tonality. So it is a little scary. And I think just from the connection with people, really the balancing of all the emotional intelligence. And so we talked about this. Both of us use some of these EI tools, and one of them is the emotional quotient inventory. And I
Hmm.
mentioned, I'm just going to be doing some training of other people for that. And I've been using that, since 2001. But it's interesting what you said. You're training people to be speakers and you give them the EQI. And maybe you can mention, it's got these 15 competencies. Maybe you can mention which competencies are you zeroing in on for a speaker?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm certified in quite a few psychometric assessments, and the reason I chose to do the EQI 2.0 is for two reasons. One is I wanted an assessment because when I'm working with very busy executives, especially in the C-suite, they work best when you have data to start from,
Right.
not just opinions, and they can also get a little sensitive sometimes about feedback, even though they can usually take it. They sometimes have this perception that they need to be at a certain level because they're a VP or an SVP or a C-suite, and that it makes them look weak or something's wrong if they're not. What they don't understand is that just because you're, you know, amazing and a master in the boardroom or in your job doesn't always translate on stage. It's a very different skill set and experience. And so I use the EQI because I want to have data as a place to start the conversation
Mhm.
from. It's irrefutable. It gives us a place to work from. The second reason I use it is because it's been actually shown any sort of emotional intelligence psychometric assessment has been proven to be the best predictor of communication success. So that's the closest link, and it's also a little easier to read through than the Hogan, and it's
Mhm.
less time
Yeah.
consuming. So I use it for those reasons. And what we really focus on are, I mean, self-regard comes into
Right.
play because we are always looking at confidence, right? The metrics that I personally use in my rubric that have been proven through a lot of professors and communication professors coming together in peer review studies on what makes a good speaker are clarity. And so it's not just clarity of words, it's precise words, it's
Right.
pausing,
Yeah.
less is more. Are you saying what you mean? I mean what you say, those kinds of things, right? The next one is confidence, super important, shown through body language as well as in
Right.
your vocal tonality, how you're saying it, all of that. The next one is competence. So you have to be competent in the subject that you're speaking on.
Hmm.
And then the next one's connection. So that's all about how are you connecting, right? How are you getting that oxytocin going? Are you really connecting with the audience? And
Yeah.
instead of talking to, are you talking with?
Hmm.
Those kinds of things. And then the last one is a story. Like, what's the story arc? What's the storyline? We want some inspiration. We want to put in some personal anecdotes, build
Right.
some humility, humanity into that. And so I saw the EQI as just the perfect component to that
Yeah.
because then I can very quickly get a sense before I
Yeah.
even work with them on how hard is it going to be for me to get them to share personal
Mhm.
anecdotes. Are they going to be low on self-expression? Are they going to be really high on stress tolerance or low on stress tolerance? How
That's
do I need to
beautiful.
work with them on, anxiety before they go speak on stage, those kinds of
Mhm.
things.
I love what you're saying because I think, especially for executives, what we do know, they get less feedback. The higher up in the organization they go, they get less feedback. So whether it's with you or me or a coach, to be able to give feedback that's confidential, because and then we can easily get wired. We talk about our reactions to be defensive. And
Mhm.
so this creates a space, a safe space where they get data, where
Mhm.
then they have an EQ score. So we're familiar with IQ, with based on 100 points. So they will get an EQ score for some of these key competencies, like you said, self-regard, assertiveness, empathy, stress tolerance,
Mhm.
flexibility. And so it helps them really integrate that. Have you found them um, really absorbing that and taking it differently than if they were here from someone else?
I believe so. Yeah, I think it's been very pleasant experience for them. I think some of them went into it like not really understanding the connection between this, why am I doing this and speaking. But then when I told them, look, this is going to cut our coaching time down by 30% because it gives me immediate insight into what's going on in here so
Right.
I can know exactly where your triggers are going to be. And
Yeah.
so we can really be more efficient.
So,
The other piece that I think they really appreciate is this whole idea of that I'm not really concerned with your EQ. As a high performer, they want a high score and they get really upset if it's not high. And
right.
I tell them all the time, look, I know it's going to be hard to not look at that, but I don't want you to be concerned about how high the score is. I'm looking for friction in each composite. I want to know where there's, maybe blind spots and
Yeah. Yeah.
inconsistencies. So for
And
instance, you're really low on assertiveness, but super high on self-expression. That means
right.
that you're probably thinking a lot of things and you're holding back and not
Yeah.
saying what you really want to say. So
Well, you,
let's unpack that. How's that going to show up on stage or as you're building out the content? Does that mean you have opinions on the content and the person writing it is just going to get what they want, but you don't like it? And then how does that translate when you actually deliver it on stage? It's not going to be authentic because you didn't share your opinion. So
yeah.
we kind of work through all that. And that's been really like eye-opening for them.
Good.
It's like, oh, okay, she really isn't concerned about me having the highest
Yeah.
score, and it's not going to get reported to the CEO. She really just wants to figure out how to help
And,
me.
and that's where exactly that was really good because people go right to the scores, and even though it's in front of them, we talk about the high scores. Their eyes go to the low scores. But you also said it's really about that balance, and so you have to kind of see
Mhm.
a pattern, and do they recognize that pattern? I think a lot of what we do as coaches is really identify patterns. Are they working? And is this working? Hey, shouldn't you do that more? Should I be more assertive? Should I use my empathy a little bit more? Or the other side we're talking about, should we dial down? I'm too assertive.
Mhm.
Um, I'm taking up too much room in the meeting talking because my emotional expression is really high. And so
Mhm.
how do they do that? But the good news is on these high performers, and I'm sure you see this also, these are subtle. They're not
Mhm.
doing it all the time. And I would
Mhm.
say, out of 10 times, maybe it's one or two that you're doing this too much. Can we be aware of what those one or two times are? And then
Mhm.
what are you going to be doing differently?
Yeah. That, and I believe the executives also find it very empowering that it's very different than any other assessment in that it can change over time, right? It's
Yeah.
skills based versus behavior based. So unlike the Myers-Briggs or something else, which you and I probably could have a long discussion on, I do believe people can change behavior. I just think it takes longer to change it.
Yeah.
But technically they say, oh, once you take the Hogan, that's your score. It's not going to change. Well, with the EQI, what I love to tell them is, look, if you and I work together on this one thing, like you want to have
Yeah.
more empathy, we take it again in 3 months, you're going to see that score go up. And I think that's
Yeah.
very empowering for them.
Yeah. I know some of the stuff that we talk about, within 6 months or so, it could be 3 months depending on person, but within 6 months, you can really see that. And then you can see
Yeah.
those scores. Well, so before we leave, we just got a couple minutes. You often talk about permission to slow down, to feel, to be human. Kind of go back to the human being piece we're talking about.
Mhm.
What does giving yourself permission look like in real time for a high achiever?
Well, for me, it comes back to presence because for me, I can't I can't see the truth unless I'm present. If I'm living
Right.
in the future or living in the past, then I'm not really able to see the truth. So for me, it's about getting them present. So it's the techniques we talked about earlier. It's the
Yeah.
breathing, it's feeling your feet on the ground, maybe doing a
Yeah.
meditation together, breath work together, whatever it is, giving them a few moments to just arrive where we are,
Yeah.
not still be in the meeting they came from or thinking
Right.
about the next meeting they're
Yeah. Yeah.
going to. And so I think that's really the most important. And then the other aspect you talked about, which is the separation and almost expanding time between
Yes.
stimulus and response,
Yeah.
and allowing yourself to pause and allowing yourself to have that pause. And then it's about what you do in between. And so the metaphor I use because of my near death experience and in my talk is that life starts with an inhale and ends with an exhale. And it's about what we do in between that matters.
Oh, I love that. That's great.
Yeah.
Um, so one of the tools that I have is called the emotional audit. And exactly what do you do in between
Mm.
the stimulus and response? And so typically when I'm on stage, I'll talk about in 15 seconds, you can have more emotional intelligence. If you pause and you ask these strategic questions, and then
Mhm.
you wait for an answer. So the first one is, what am I thinking right now? And is there a
Mm.
pattern there? Especially if you're agitated, and it's the metacognition. And the second
Mhm.
one is, what am I feeling right now? Meta awareness. You do a body scan, you kind of see what's going on in your body. Can you name what that? The third question is, what do I want right now? Each of these you can do, you get an answer in 3 seconds. That's meta attention. So what am I trying to accomplish? What am I trying to do? I mean, you got to create the gap. The fourth
Mm.
question is, how am I getting in my own way now? And so that's kind of the trigger. I'm not listening.
Mhm.
I'm sighing here. I'm tapping my foot. I'm not getting what I want. I withdraw, or my tone of voice is not right. And then the last one is the corrective action. What
Mhm.
do I need to do now to be my best? And that
Mhm.
comes into all the things that you're saying. And so in that gap, there's something they can do along with the breathing and everything else. And strategically, they can get a better response, like you're saying, from being
Yeah.
reactive to a better response.
Yeah, I love that. And the one thing I find very common, and I used to believe this, is that they think that asking, like taking that space and time, whether it be in the moment or even saying, I'm not going to answer this in this meeting. Let me sit with that. I'll get back to
Yeah.
you. They used to think that was weakness. And it's not, it's strategic, it's
Yes.
wisdom, and
Right.
so that's what I try to share with them is honor yourself and the way that you're thinking and your time and what's going on in your body. And it's okay to get back to somebody and to slow down, to speed up.
That's great. Well, you got, I can tell, a real gift to be able to give to other people. And I'm sure that, they're very welcoming in what you're able to do. And let me just reiterate your website again. It's Kendra Dahlstrom, DAHLSTROM.com. And you can connect with her. She's got a lot of different tools there. You can also make some appointment to check in with Kendra. So, oh, Kendra, so let me ask you this last quick question because we only have a moment here. And so
Yep.
the idea, just answer leadership is all about, and I know what you're going to say. I think I know what you're going to say.
For me, I think, yeah, it's my ability to stay at peace and present
Okay.
under pressure.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say presence.
Yeah.
And then the last one we'll leave you with at work, it's all about
Resonance, not performance.
resonance. And then the last one, this is about you. During the workday, what's the best way you recharge?
I get myself out in nature. I will go for walks. I meditate. I use an infrared sauna. I spend
Oh,
time
nice.
with my dogs to get my oxytocin going in between meetings. Another quick tip for your audience is if you're ever stressed out or you're in fear mode, I keep a dot to dot book or those adult coloring books next to me. And if you can just start drawing for a little bit, it activates the other part of your brain. And so you're
Oh,
not
okay.
worrying so much. It gets you into creativity very
That's
quickly.
good. That's a new one. I hadn't heard of that. That's
Yeah.
great. All right, Kendra. Well, thank you so much. You've
Thank
been
you for
listening to,
having me. I loved it.
yeah, and you can get more in touch with us at drrellinadler.com. And this is the Leadership Development News. Thanks for tuning up your performance, and we'll see you again next week.